Good evening, everybody. My name is John Gruen. I'm the CEO of Fordham Technologies, and we are extremely excited to sponsor this event and listen to the esteemed panelists. At Fordham, we are mission-focused, aerospace awareness, counter-drone company that is in all the hot spots. I literally just flew in from Ukraine to this event, and so we partner with all the folks that are out there in the field doing it day in, day out. And that includes our wonderful Army partners. So I will hand it over to Patrick, who will moderate this event. Thank you, Patrick.
Okay. Hey, thank you all for showing up so much. Thank you so much for Fordham for being here. Really glad to see such an amazing crowd here in a space that I think that the Ramones played in 1979. So one guy gets it. That's okay. One. So we have a fantastic conversation lined up for you folks. We have, to me now, at this point, they're just Will and Chris, but we have Brigadier General Gomier from the Kennedy Special Warfare School to talk about the future of special operations, how we're creating that now in the year 2030. And Major General Eubank runs the future of networking for the United States Army, and that's a lot of people that need to go to a lot of places and do a lot of stuff. So towards the end of the conversation, I want to hear a little bit from y'all. Raise your hand, and I'm going to run to you with a mic, and we'll try and work you in. Will's got a hard stop at 6, and we're going to respect that. But I'm going to let them grab this mic that now they are, in true Army fashion, must share between the two of them. And a quick intro to who you are and what you do. And then we're going to have a seat and start talking.
So, hey, good evening, everybody. If the Ramones did play here, then I'm in the right place because I'm a huge fan, but I don't think anybody got the Ramones joke earlier, so apparently generation is this close enough? Can you hear me now? Okay, all right. So I'm Will Beaupere. I'm the commanding general of the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School at Fort Liberty, North Carolina.
Good evening, Chris Eubank. I am the Commanding General for U.S. Army Network Enterprise Technology Command, Fort Huachuca, Arizona.
Okay, keep this. So we're going to have a seat here, and let's get into a little bit because the overlap between special operations and networking, it sounds a little bit esoteric, but if you look at just the headlines that we're watching today, and you look at the headlines that we've been watching over the course of the past year and a half out of Ukraine, it becomes really clear how small tactical operations are enabled by robust and diverse network connectivity. And that is recreating right now what tactical warfare looks like. So, Will, if you will, you are in charge in many ways of helping to understand and create future concepts around special operations warfare. When you look to what we've all been watching and seeing out of Ukraine, what are some big lessons learned for you in terms of how just the soft profession is going to change in the next few years?
Okay, so thanks, Patrick. Appreciate the question. So as a center of excellence, we drive doctrinal change, we drive training and leader development, and we drive personnel policies for special forces, psychological operations, and civil affairs. So when we are asked about what lessons we're drawing from Ukraine, there's a range of lessons out there, but I would key in on a couple things. Number one, the importance of information advantage. Right, I think we can all appreciate in the early days of the war how we watched the Ukrainian government at the strategic level and then all the way down to the tactical level gain superiority in the information dimension through applied application of messaging and strategic messaging globally, but also of the enemy, right? So I think the first thing I think about is as the school responsible for psychological operations, how do we professionalize the psychological operations career field? So as we look to 2030, we want to stand up and establish a psychological warfare school that would bring together the capacity that exists both in the reserves and on active duty under one school system that would focus specifically on the influence task of information advantage, changing behavior through influence, and really spending some time modernizing that capability for the Army. So that's one. Number two, I think, is the presence of ubiquitous technology on the battlefield. And by that, I mean really is the human and machine interface. As we watch the war unfold in Ukraine, what the Ukrainians and the Russians are both doing on both sides with unmanned systems, whether they are ground-based, aerial-based systems, or in some cases subsurface, and how they are controlling those to gain positional advantage against an adversary, both through lethal and non-lethal means. That is really fascinating to us. So we're exploring that very closely. We've stood up some new courses as we look to 2030 about providing our operators with additional skills that enable them to better understand how to integrate unmanned systems, aerial, ground, and subsurface platforms into operations. I think that's absolutely critical. And then thirdly, I think really it boils down to the humans themselves, and how we assess and train the best possible special operators for that future warfare environment that is just so demanding physically, emotionally, mentally. So really investing in our humans, experimenting with wearable technology. How do we monitor our operators and our students, monitor their performance over time? What data do we need to collect on them to make them better at their job, to perform better? Exploring the effects of sleep on human performance. So doing a lot of things on human performance. I think that's a key lessons learned application for the SOF community.
Okay. There's a ton in there, right? And I noticed too, if you want, one of those subjects that he just touched on that we want to come back to is psychological operations and influence operations. We're going to get to that a little bit later on, because if you look at the size of that activity and what we call our peer competitors, I'm told China has something like 500,000 people that just work on Instagram, and you don't see a lot of them right now. They're primarily targeting like the population there. But in terms of what the United States government is cleared and legally able to do in terms of influence operations, it's pretty much like how many people that you've got working for you. It's an incredibly small, talented, intense group that is leading an incredibly important activity. It's going to be a lot bigger. But one of the themes that you just touched on that I think maybe gives Chris a headache, or maybe he's excited about it. But if he's excited about it, that seems crazy to me. All of those things you mentioned, they all have to talk to each other. There is so much. You're talking about soldier-borne sensors. You're talking about semi-autonomous drones, autonomous drones, a lot of different systems creating live fires en masse, and you want those fires to have intelligence, and that means they got to talk to something at some point. And trying to do that in a region like the Pacific under enormous contested conditions. Chris, how's that going?
That's a great question. So I'd be kidding myself if I said it didn't make me nervous, but it's no different than we operate every day in our house, right? And so what we're doing inside Netcom is actually trying to figure out how we enable the Army just like we enable ourselves. And so lately it's been, how do we take the things that we use every day and use them in our applications? So the phone in our pocket versus handing off a government furnished piece of equipment, big laptop. How do we enable the soldier via a phone, a tablet, with data, the right data at the right place at the right time to make decisions and then feed that data back? So instead of being focused on the network, stay focused on the data, enable the data to the right place, make decisions, and then get the data back. So the network becomes agnostic, right? So it's about the network available to you, whether it's 5G, it's satellite, it's line of sight, it's fiber. It's agnostic, and it's really about the soldier on the battlefield being able to get to data they need use the data to enable decisions, and then push those decisions back or forward depending on what they need. But so it sounds pretty daunting, but when you think about it, it's what we do every day. We
Right.
just got we have to figure out how we apply it to our business, which is warfighting.
Yeah. So this idea of like being able to use this wide variety, this spectrum of different networks, you've got satellite communications, you've got commercial networks that you're going to have folks having to rely on, which there's, I think we're talking about the Indo-Pacific, and you're talking about China's just footprint in the telecommunications infrastructures that exist there. And then you've got esoteric, very exquisite, forms of communication that work great, but very low bandwidth. How do you see that myriad menagerie of different communications protocols, channels? How do you make sure that when you're delivering something to the warfighter, that it's trusted enough, or that they understand the risks that are involved in how they're choosing to communicate at that moment? Is that what you're trying to do? Is help people understand the risks and rewards of different types of communication at different moments?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a hybrid, right? So right now we're leveraging commercial. We're leveraging government, so MilSatcom, commercial Satcom. We're leveraging the 5G infrastructure globally, so it's not just something we train on in CONUS. We use it overseas, and it's stitching that information together. It's really about the user, the customer, the soldier at the edge of the battlefield trusting the data, right? So it's okay. I understand the data's good, and then pushing that data back and forth based on its security. So we're focused right now on securing the data, not just the pipe. And then it's about identity and credentialing, right? So identity and access management. And all this, we've got our eye, just like everybody in the industry, on a zero trust model, right? So it's no longer trust but verify. It's don't trust. We're gonna verify you and then start trusting both humans and devices. So, but I think the soldiers understand what they can trust and rely on at every level. Yeah. And so, this new group of soldiers, whether they're a special operator or a conventional soldier, they live this every day. They grew up with this. They probably are more comfortable in that space than we are, to be honest.
Can I add something?
Yes, please, Will. Go.
So, from a special operations perspective, I just want to add a layer of complexity to this problem. Number one is the ability to have redundancy in our communication systems, right? So we talk about having a primary, but you always need an alternate and a contingency and even an emergency form of communications. So you may depend on every one of those mediums that General Eubank highlighted for us. Second is partnered mission systems. How do you communicate with an ally, a coalition partner, when you look at a theater like Indo-PACOM and the diversity of partners and the diversity of systems and capabilities that they have? I think that's a pretty daunting network challenge. But we in special operations, I think our value proposition is absolutely our partnered engagement around the globe. So we bring that partner integration into the joint force, into the fight. But that's dependent on a pretty robust architecture and communication system. So we're thinking deeply about that with our NetCom partners. Not only how do we communicate internally as a joint force, but with a coalition.
Yeah, let me stick with that for a second, and the building of the partner force, because one of the clear lessons that comes out of Ukraine is that if you are working with the United States military and you're building together an NCO corps, for example, so pivotal in that conflict. If you're building the ability to have a small team go out and basically punch up on their weight times 1,000, then that happens after a long-term relationship. And right now, the U.S. Army is going out and they're making these relationships. And I'm told, after having been there kind of recently, that regional partners, Malaysia, Guam, the Philippines, Indonesia, they're wanting more and more to partner with the U.S. on exercises and even partner with each other. And if you know how trust works in that region, that's actually kind of surprising, but certainly optimistic. It's an optimistic signal. Tell us a little bit about how you see the challenge of building up some partner forces in that region to do kind of what we're seeing in Ukraine, where you've got small teams that are punching well above their weight, but you've got so many different cultures, so many different military institutions to work with in order to create that capability. What do you see as the challenge there and the opportunity?
Yeah, so I'll look at it from an institutional perspective as a school and a center. A couple things to offer there. Number one, we are exploring this concept of irregular warfare and strategic competition. What is irregular warfare? It is the application of indirect asymmetric capabilities to gain advantage over our adversaries. I would argue some of these partnered operations is a form of irregular warfare. So how do we do that? How do we do that at the institution? Number one is we're writing about it. We're very interested in this doctrine of asymmetric, indirect approaches and codifying that in doctrine for the Army and the Joint Force. I think that's a big step forward. If you know anything about the Army and the military, we train based on our doctrine. So you got to have a doctrinal foundation first and foremost. So we're building an irregular warfare academy, actually, at the John F. Kennedy Special Warfare Center and School. The idea is to draw that doctrine organically into the academy for the Army and the Joint Force, but also, I would argue, for the interagency, because there's a role for the wider whole of government in this space when you're working with partners. Second is the operators themselves. As we look at this institutionally, we focus very, very exclusively on language, regional expertise, and cultural training for our special operators. They get 4 to 6 months of language training and regional expertise training before they graduate our courses and go off to the operational force. That encompasses about 12 different languages across the globe, different regional alignment and orientation, studying the region, the culture. So when they begin operating in that area, they're building from a foundation built at the schoolhouse. And then I would tell you what I've been amazed with is literally the generational relationships we now have with some of these countries. You named some of them in your opening comments there, Patrick, but we are literally at a point now where we have multiple generations of operators that have developed deep personal relationships over the course of multiple generations now in many of these countries. And again, I think that's a relative advantage for us.
Okay, I'm gonna tack onto that, and then I'm gonna ask you something that you'll have to respond to too. So sorry about that. But when we're talking about asymmetry in warfare, and right now the lesson is, hey, Ukraine is fantastic at this, but in the Indo-PACOM area, you're looking at mercantile ships that aren't necessarily part of the Chinese Navy, but they can operate in that way. You're looking at just a whole new future of gray zone warfare that's going to be really frustrating, I think, for a lot of folks. What to your mind, is China and also what is Russia doing in the asymmetric warfare space that deserves more attention? And then I'll ask you both to respond to that confusion that gray zone warfare is supposed to create and how you're adapting to it.
Yeah, so again, looking at this institutionally, we try to stay very threat informed in everything we do. So we take a hard look at our curriculum, and we make sure that the curriculum is relevant to today's threats and the scenarios we could face both in irregular and conventional warfare. And the two could happen literally simultaneously, right? You talk about the gray zone. There could be gray zone activity in the middle of a conventional war. Yeah. So I think you have to understand the relationship between the two. But it's this notion of, for us, winning the first fight without ever having to fight the first fight, right? And so it's this concept of campaigning. You hear General Flynn talk about this a lot. Forward in theater, campaigning, constantly forward, persistently engaged, and creating advantage for the joint force without ever having to go to war. And so I would argue we special operations, the Army, the joint force, is well equipped to do that with our partners. And we draw on lessons that we observe our adversaries conducting and rely on our own doctrine as well. That's why to me this Irregular Warfare Academy is such a great opportunity as we roll out this concept of irregular warfare and what is strategic competition. what are those activities that we need to conduct to create advantage against those gray zone activities that we're constantly faced with.
Yeah.
So to pile on that, so the cyberspace domain is competition every day, right? So competition, crisis, conflict. So like Will said, we're relying on threat informed every day. So it's threat informed, and the first thing is, what does our network look like? So defend the network, and that allows us to posture to be a good enabler for whether it's a soft force, joint force, conventional force at the edge of the battlefield. To go back real quick, I think data is the key, right? And so it's we keep talking about the gray zone. We talk about networks, and so you talked about the partnership. I don't get as concerned about the different networks as I do the data, right? So if we tag the data appropriately so that we can share it with our partners, that's key, right? So I think we've got to shift our focus from how are we getting two networks to talk to how do we share data that has been tagged appropriately for one partner or multiple partners. And so that's where we're focused right now, is how do we tag that data so that at a certain classification level for a certain partner so that we can share it.
Okay, let me stick with that for a second, because one of the things that came out of the Ukraine conflict is the entire United States government had to really fast, very fast for the United States government. It took forever in terms of regular human timescales, but very fast for the United States government, had to figure out how to share unclassified data with basically a lot of people in Ukraine, and that was so decisive, as well as around with partners around the world. And if you talk to folks today, they'll say, hey, there's still these classification issues that exist on a bureaucratic level. And people with 4 stars go when they complain about it on Capitol Hill, and lawmakers there on Capitol Hill say, yes, I absolutely hear you. And yet these bureaucratic kind of obstacles stand in place of information sharing across classification of stuff that needs to be moved. So I'll ask you to take a little risk here. Is there any bureaucratic obstacle in place right now, or any policy in place that gets in the way of that information sharing, aside from the technology? Like, how are we doing actually figuring out the laws and policies that are going to allow for fast information sharing with, say, the Philippines or Malaysia?
So I think we're getting better. Are we there yet? Absolutely not. But I think, Will talked about General Flynn and campaigning. You see General Williams doing it inside of the European theater, General Cavoli. So I think we're getting better. There's still work to be done, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we understand, based on potentially 20 years of building partner capacity in both Iraq and Afghanistan and working with partners in those two theaters, that we understand we're not doing this alone. And so we are figuring out how to share that data. So we're having conversations about not just the unclassified network, but the SBU network, so the secure but unclassified network, right? So how do we tag that so we share it with multiple partners? So I do think we're making progress. I think that the whole of government sees this and understands this. It's not just the Department of Defense. They understand we have to be able to share with partners. So I do think we're getting better. We have some work to be done still.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, at one point on data as well. We think somehow we monopolize data as a U.S. military. The truth is our partners and allies have a lot of data as well. And we stand to gain a lot from, incorporating their data into our processes and our systems. So I'm really interested in this concept of data literacy, and what does that mean? How do you define that? How do you institutionalize that in courses and make our soldiers data literate? The process will catch up, right? The policies will catch up, but we got to train ourselves on how to be data literate.
Just real quick on that one. So we've recognized that. And so the U.S. Army Signal School right now is building a data literacy course inside of their curriculum, inside the Cyber Center of Excellence, just like Will does at the That's a soft center of excellence. And so they're building that capacity now because we've recognized we have to be data literate. Inside of Netcom, I have a data science directorate. So just inside my formation, we're doing the same thing, building data literacy from top to bottom. So everybody inside of our formation understands data top to bottom. And so that's a key component as we shift from being network focused or network centric to data centric.
Okay, that's a really interesting point. So at Fort Liberty, formerly, some of you might have been there, but it was called Fort Bragg. It's now Fort Liberty. They have the 82nd and the 118th are moving out with data literacy as kind of a core component of airborne operations. Like, this is a whole thing. You're going to be in an environment where you're going to be surrounded by data that now you have to be able to make sense of, and it speaks to this human-machine teaming thing. The operators, future operators at the edge, are going to be in charge of like a lot of different things that are they'll be in charge of programming in a weird way. Not in a way where they're sitting at a laptop kind of, pounding out Python, but maybe they will. So talk to me really quickly about what are the future competencies for a soft warrior at the edge that you're just beginning to explore today, and how are those enabled through this composite future networking paradigm that you're describing?
Yeah, so our people are absolutely phenomenal, and one of the soft truths that we abide by is that humans ultimately are more important than any hardware. So I think you got to start again with the human. How do you enable the human? To your point, Patrick, what is it about the human of the future at the tactical edge that we expect him or her to be able to do in a denied or politically sensitive environment? So I think first and foremost, the way we look at it is technology should enable the operator, but not overwhelm, right? And so I think you got to be careful with not incorporating technology or capabilities that is overly complex, but it's got to be intuitive, and it's got to be very responsive, and it has to be to an extent tethered, but somewhat autonomous. So you can give it a task, trust that it's going to go do the task, and focus on those things that only the human can do with human quality, intelligence, processing speed of the humans in the loop that are making decisions that are ethical and appropriate for that situation. Something machines can enable you to do. So there is this aspect of interface, and at the tactical edge, what does that look like? Conceptually, on kit, what does the operator carry to have that interface? Is it a ground-mounted system? Is it something you wear? And it's got to be able to integrate multiple systems simultaneously into one interface. I think that's key, because it goes to the number one principle as we move forward. To me, that's simplicity, right? I think that's absolutely critical. You can't make this overly complex. Otherwise, our operators are not going to use it, or the fight is going to overwhelm their ability to focus on what matters, which is lethality and gaining advantage over the adversary. So simplicity is key. I think second is the education piece, right? So we mentioned a course at the institution that we've stood up recently on robotics and unmanned system integration. How do you become a master trainer in robotics? Because one of the things that we have always been asked to do in any conflict that SOF has been involved in is training a partner force to gain a capability to go do something against an adversary.
And now that means robotics. Now that means training.
Exactly. So that means training a partner force in a robotic capability. How do you integrate robotics into a schema maneuver for ground combat? I think that's a critical requirement of the future, and that's something that we're exploring right now with our operators. How do you give them that skill? Is it a new military occupational specialty, or is it an additional skill that is acquired by an operator that has baseline skills, that is a master of the basics, but then has additional skills with robotics, and then that goes forward into theater at the edge with a partner. So those are some of the things we're looking at.
That's fun. Can you imagine like a future version of like A-Team where like there's a robot guy, there's like Face and like the wild card guy and whoever, like Mr. T. Yeah. And there's one guy that's like the robot guy that just like commands robots. It's sort of like crazy. Yeah. Mr. T would be command robots. So, but okay, to that point though, how do you deal with that from like a network angle? And also I want to get to this. artificial intelligence, you know, if I can go and I can interact with the entire Azure cloud, then whatever generative AI thing that they put in front of me will be a spell. It'll be wizardry, right? I don't necessarily have access to the Azure cloud or any other cloud when I'm in the mud of the Philippines. So I have to find cloud resources that are much smaller, and then the AI result, the product that AI gives you, is going to, frankly, in my experience, suck a little bit. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So I think it goes back to what Will said, and it's about complexity versus simplicity, right? And so I think the goal is, we'll touch kind of man-machine interface first. And so it's right now, from a networking perspective, we're trying to pull complexity as far up as possible so that the organization, brigade, battalion, team, and below don't have to worry about complex tasks at their level. It's something they do every day. So it's a phone, it's a tablet. And so I think that's number one. So complexity as far up as possible, simple as far down as possible. Artificial intelligence is going to be interesting just across the battle space. You know, inside of NetCom right now, from a networking perspective, we're having the conversation about what do we let artificial intelligence do or don't do. It's kind of the, hey, can I use it to write my college paper or not? And so we're having that discussion inside of our cyber formation about policy with the Department of the Army CIO and the G6. What is the policy for using AI from a networking perspective? I think for the soldiers at the edge, I think what we need them to do is feed the machine on what they need. Let the artificial intelligence happen at a level above them and feed the product back. To your point, what's the product going to look like? And so that becomes iterative over time as that artificial intelligence machine, Azure, Google, whatever it might be, gets better at what the soldier's looking for. But I think we've got to be careful about how much complexity we put at the edge. To Will's point, we got to continue to draw that complexity up versus pushing it down. But yeah.
So we're going to go here to audience questions. Just raise your hand, and I'm going to come at you with a microphone, so we make sure that you capture your voice, and start raising your hands as you begin to finish your libations and formulate a question in order to participate. We'd love to see some hands. But let me stick with AI for just a second, Will. As you look across, okay, you've got large language models that are, again, writing papers for us that are not very good. You have Project Maven and its current iteration, which was a Pathfinder program out of AFSOC, right? Which is finding objects across this vast sea of video and drone footage that the U.S. military has that is unique to it, and becoming more and more precise all the time, understanding pattern of life, understanding the difference between objects. When you look at that future soft warrior that has some SATCOM ability, some cyber ability, probably a good understanding of the robots at their disposal, how do you envision that person's interaction and experience level with artificial intelligence? And raise your hands, too, so I know to come to.
Yeah, so Patrick said you get a picture with him if you're the first question, so well done, sir. So how do I see large language models and AI? I think, again, I got to go back to the institution, right? We run a school and a center. I'll give you a couple examples, but I think fundamentally it's got to start at the institutional level in the training of the operators. You have to expose them to the technology, and they have to be challenged to use that technology. And this is where synthetic training environments become really interesting. So, I mentioned psychological operations. One of the things we're doing with our PSYOP soldiers in their qualification course is exposing them to a synthetic internet environment that they can operate in freely. And this is where large language models become really interesting, because we can now produce content at speed and tempo and overwhelm them cognitively in a synthetic training environment with content that could be factual or in some cases mis or disinformation. So now they have to deal with this virtual environment and sift through this volume of data, but they're doing it in a closed, confined, synthetic environment. So when it comes time to actually have to leverage that technology in theater, they've been exposed to it in training.
Well, that should be a requirement for voting in this country at this point, I'm afraid. Let me stick with that for a second, because we have two questions. We do, but I want to, before I get to them, PsyOps. You are the kind of intellectual head of PsyOps for the U.S. military, which is the intellectual head of PsyOps for the United States government, in a way. I think that's a fair characterization. Joint Force, yes, you can push back on it out of humility, but MISO is the component of the service that does this. Really quickly, when you look at the trends in artificial intelligence and you look at the job of psychological and influence activities, where do you see the opportunity space for you, and where do you see the challenge space? And yes, we will get to your two questions right after this. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think I just talked about it a little bit with artificial intelligence. I think there's huge opportunities. I think so. Our qualification course, our PsyOps qualification course, is joint accredited. Joint Staff J7, joint accredited. So we're now drawing U.S. Marine Corps students to our PsyOps course. Huge opportunity as a joint enterprise. To I push back a little bit. I think it is DoD centric.
Yeah.
But I think there's a huge opportunity for the PsyWar school to evolve into a joint psychological warfare institution for the Joint Force. I think that's where I see opportunity. Where do I see challenges? I think it's in lessons learned and watching what our adversaries are doing to gain their own information advantage. And we have to study that very, very closely. We have to understand mis and disinformation. What is factual? How do you get to multi-source confirmation of information so we're not making flawed decisions based on flawed data?
Okay, let me go out here, right here. First, you, sir. Go ahead. Tell your name.
So Tom Perkowski, Apex View. So you mentioned a robotics core, but with Secretary Hicks announcing Replicator, does every member of the military now need to be cognizant in drone operation? Is it as essential a skill as being able to fire a weapon?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I think the short answer is yes. I think we're evolving into an environment now where that technology is ubiquitous on the battlefield. We see it everywhere. We're drawing lessons learned from around the world. Everywhere there's a conflict, unmanned systems are at play. I think from a training perspective, we have to take a hard look at how we put these in the hands of our soldiers and our special operators so they can experiment with them, use them, expend them without having to sign a statement of charges that's, a couple $1,000s every time they fly one. This has to be an expendable capability that we drive through the training models. I think that's critical.
Yes, sir. As a former AUSA Level 3 instructor at SWIC, first off, without going into too much detail, I'm sure we're adopting or changing our TTPs with regards to how we instruct at in that course to adjust for AI and ML with regards to, how we're adopting and how we're training our students. But the second part of that question, how concerned are you with how we collect human and in how we're adjusting, especially in urban environments with our adversaries, especially with regards to China, sir? Over.
Yeah, so hey, we're hiring. If you want to come back as an instructor, see me, give me your resume afterwards. So I think, I'm gonna attack this from a data perspective and give my counterpart an opportunity here. I think fundamentally data is information, right? How you gather that information is through multiple means. But I worry about the quality of the data, right? And how do you assure quality? And what level of confidence do you have in that quality? And then because ultimately what does that data do? It informs the targeting process. It informs the intelligence process, and we make lethality decisions based on that data, right? So quality and confidence in that quality. I don't know if you want to comment.
And I would say it enables decision making. That's the end state, right? And so, we get charged with making sure it's usable, it's secure, it's transportable, there's integrity there. And so every day, again, culturally, we are figuring out that it's not about the network anymore. It is about the data. So, the question about drones, what I automatically thought of as Will was answering was, where's that data going? Wherever you're flying it, right? Whether it's in Fort Polk, Louisiana, or now Fort Johnson, right? whether you're flying it there as a part of training or overseas, where's the data going? How did it get there? Is it good? Is it usable? Is it secure? And how are we then analyzing it and getting it back to the edge? So everything we do today, my organization is Netcom. It could easily be Datacom maybe, because we are starting to shift from what used to be network to data, and now it's about this, this one network that provides data to the user on the battlefield. So Will was spot on, and it's got to be usable.
I just want to introduce. Okay, last question here we've got.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm Dr. Sereo, and I would like to know, with all the points you've made, particularly on the training, where do you see the interfacing with where the Ukrainian government is moving across at all levels on digitization? The digitization is the mode in which they are operating. Thank you.
So this is probably a good question for General Eubank. I'll just say one thing from the training institution, ma'am. Thanks for the question. Digitization of our training material, right? So how do you enable, back to the tactical edge, the things you learn? How do you ingest information? How do you process that information as an operator? How do you learn and internalize that? And then how do you have the ability to digitally reach back to that knowledge to make informed decisions? That's really interesting to me. And so I think institutionally with the Army and the Joint Force, we're taking a hard look at modernizing our curriculum and digitizing our curriculum.
Yeah, so I think what I'm fascinated with is the Ukrainians have made it simple. I mean, they, we sat up here for the last 30 minutes talking about simplicity at the edge. They're living it, right? They've done nothing complicated at the edge. And so as you watch them, as you watch us, I mean, that is what we're trying to do. How do we put the information you need on something you use every day? I mean, we're doing it in the Army today, right? Bring your own device is a real thing in the Army today. So you can sign up, get an account, and put your work on your personal phone and carry one device versus two. So that's simplifying things all the way to the edge. Every one of us for the last 20 years has asked, how come I have to carry two devices? And so we can now do that for you. And that's what fascinates me with the Ukrainians. They have made it simple for the operator at the edge.
Yeah, just a real quick note on that before we break. Under Fedorov, who was their Minister of Digital Innovation, Ukraine has really led a society-wide transformation to a 21st century economy that is going to emerge from this conflict, I think, being able to provide not only robust networking for their military operations, but new services and businesses kind of across all of Europe. And it's really fantastic to watch. It's based on, yes, a lot of cloud computing. Some of it is based outside of the country, a lot of resilience, and just deep understanding of cyber operations. And we do have one more question, but we also have, Will's got to jump out of a plane at 6. And
Plus or minus 30 seconds.
So plus or minus 30? Real quick, sir. Let me, just super quick.
Ken Fielding with Storm Center Communications. Having been to the Ukraine and observed the highlands and the lowlands of the topography, how do you, I guess, assess or keep up with the changing landscape when an attack occurs or when bombings occur in order to be more efficient in responding to the mission-critical issues of the Ukraine as well?
So just so I understand the question, specifically tied to topography or just the situation?
Well, the topography will affect how you, I guess, engage and move in your mission-critical activities. So how do you keep up to date on that changing topography so that you won't, I guess, get caught up in a bad geographical area that traps some of you or that...
Yeah, I think I understand the question. Thanks. And then so there may be a NetCom aspect to this. But I think first and foremost, I go back to humans and how we select and assess our humans. And one of the things we assess for is adaptability. And I think if you can get an operator or a soldier, I think if you're talking more broadly about the joint force, that is adaptable and can respond to a situation. I think we see this the world over, right? We have soldiers in the Middle East right now. There's a crisis in the Middle East. Our soldiers have to be adaptable. They have to be able to respond. How do you develop that? It starts with the basics. You got to be brilliant at the fundamentals, brilliant at the basics, so our soldiers can respond with what they know, which is the fundamentals of warfare. That hasn't changed. The principles still remain the same, and we have to be masters of our trade. I don't know if there's a NetCom aspect to that.
I think the network's got to be the same: adaptable, flexible, resilient, right? And so, as topography changes, everybody's a sensor, right? And so, I think the network has got to be adaptable, flexible, and resilient, so that as things change, we can ensure those changes hit across the network globally. So the information that somebody's seeing is relevant.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, round of applause for Chris, Will, our sponsor, Fordham. Government Exec Media team put this together. And y'all selves, thank you for coming out on a Tuesday. Go AUSA. Thanks.
Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah.